If you had to categorize the India-Pakistan relationship in one word, how would you describe it?
Adversarial.
That's Samir Lalwani with the Stimson Center. He's an expert on South Asia, interstate rivalries, and nuclear deterrence, which makes him the perfect person to give us a lesson on neighboring nuclear superpowers who have serious beef with each other. That adversarial relationship has lasted, well, since the countries were created. Let's rewind to after the end of World War II. The British decided to back out, and what was known as the British Raj was split in two, which is where the problems really started.
It was fairly hastily decided. There were some sort of basic principles or plans for divisions, but then they weren't fully adhered to. But then what evolves from that is still something that I think both India and Pakistan have to take ownership over, which is a fairly nasty process.
That's led to 3 major wars and consistent fighting across the border. There have been attempts to get along, but something always goes wrong, sometimes because of terrorism.
In public statements, I think Pakistan is much more of a vocal advocate for conflict resolution. That said, whenever the two parties are close to this, resolving this or even sort of getting the process started, spoilers tend to emerge from the Pakistani side. On the other side, India routinely seems to sort of eschew the possibility of conflict resolution by prioritizing the issue of terrorism above all else.
You may be thinking, this doesn't really concern us here in the US. If this is a fight between neighboring countries and doesn't really leave the borders, why should you care? Well, nukes.
It's the only place in the world where you have 2 nuclear powers that regularly, almost on a daily basis, are shooting at each other across the border. When people think about sort of the highest risks of a nuclear war, the highest probability seems to be with India and Pakistan just because of this daily kinetic activity that doesn't exist with North Korea, that doesn't exist with Russia and China.
That nuclear component has forced the rest of the world to pay more attention to the region, but if there's going to be an ending to the conflict, Samir thinks it's likely going to be bilateral and incremental.
We might be more hopeful for something like a modus vivendi that's kind of a live and let live situation rather than a full-fledged conflict resolution formalized process. But a modus vivendi can sort of eventually lead to a conflict resolution. Something like ceasefires can eventually sort of become the basis for future peace accords if we can get to that stage.